Is Annie Hardy. I'm the founder and managing director of Zeet Insights, and we are a TechRanch partner. I'm glad to have you join us today. What we're going to be talking about is a topic very close to my heart. It's called Finding Your Niche, How Curiosity Can Fuel Your Success. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some slides, we're going to talk a bit, and at the end I'll leave some room for questions. Now you can also submit your questions in the chat box, and so that's probably where we will start at the very end of the presentation. We'll begin with the questions that have been submitted via chat. So to begin, let me just go ahead and start in. So what we do specifically is we call what we do delivering aha moments through market and design research. So what we do is we help companies dig in more deeply into questioning their assumptions about their audience and their product, and instead helping them recognize the actual opportunities in front of them and the actual best opportunities they have to sell, and their actual buyers, not just who will consider their product, but who will buy. And that's why we want to talk today. I mean, we've helped lots of companies do this. So we've partnered with lots of types of companies and global entities and large businesses and small businesses. So we've helped them ask the same kinds of questions that we're helping you ask today. And going back to that, why are we here? Why is niche important? Why is curiosity important? It's critical. So let's give an example. So software developers, 20% of software developers are female, 80% are male. So if you think about who's creating products, it's most likely somebody who is a guy, especially if you're creating for the American market. However, when you look at American demographics, the majority of Americans are female, and the minority of Americans are male. So if you are a male, completely male team creating a product that is family focused or consumer focused or focused on women, perhaps an e-commerce product, knowing that American women are buying, if you look at the landscape of your users and who you want to reach and your best revenue opportunity, that opportunity is probably not going to be alienating women by creating a product and experience that doesn't appeal to them. You have to ask questions about your audience. You have to test the assumptions and the biases that you may have about what they want if they don't look like you. You can't assume that your audience needs or wants or acts like you would. And so that's why curiosity, asking questions, digging into this, finding the right spot for your company and your brand, that's why these are critical questions that we want to ask and answer today. And these are really important because if you are an entrepreneur and you are looking at scaling up your business, if you get VC funding, 90% of the companies, between 80 and 90, depending on who you ask, 90% of VC-backed startups fail. And 42% of those cite a lack of product market fit as a factor in their downfall. So if you think about how many startups fail and you think about how critical it is to ask the right questions about what your audience needs and who they are, this can increase your likelihood of success and mitigate the risk of applying bias to design and brand. You're trying to do something a bit more conservatively than just investigating or investing resources in something that's not 100% research backed. So I'm going to stop for a minute and I want you to think. So if you own your own company, which I'm assuming everybody on this call does, I want you to think about how you would describe your company and how you would describe your global customers. So think about it. So let's use Zeet Insights for an example. I could say my company is Zeet Insights, a market and design research firm. And our global customers are technology companies that want to understand more about their audience. So I could say that. That would be one example. So think for a minute about how you would do that. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to dig into that a little more deeply. And once again, I'm going to use zeet as an example. Did you introduce your audience as your potential customer? So for instance, what I said was, I'm looking at technology companies who want to understand more about their audience. And that's true. But in reality, what happens is that it's not just generally technology companies that want to understand more about their audience. It is technology companies with designers and UX teams and founders and executives who are incentivized to ask questions about their audience because they have felt a critical pressure because they couldn't ask specific questions. Most of them have failure in their past, or they are looking at down the barrel of a gun because they need to understand more about their customer because they need to scale or keep up with their promises. These are very specific buyers. They listen to podcasts, or they're very curious, or they're readers. And so as I dig into who my global audience is, it's different than just a general technology buyer or a technology company who wants something. A technology company who wants something will consider what I do, but they won't necessarily buy it. So the more specific I get, I am able to find my own niche for my own brand that's going to resonate more with the actual customer, not this potential customer that would consider, the 80% that will consider and not buy. You are diluting your brand value and your product's focus. Instead, you need to pull back a little bit and through your curiosity, ask critical questions of your audience, of the market, of economic factors that inform the smartest, most intelligent approach you can take to your niche audience. And to that end, if you're looking at scaling and you're looking at extending into a new market, and many of you are looking at going from a small startup to a bigger startup. Many of you are a funded startup and you're looking at extending into new global markets. Many of you own companies that have been around for a couple of years and you have new goals. But what I encourage you to do, especially if you're going into new markets, are you sure you know who your global customer is? How are they different from your customers today? What's important to them? How do they consider and buy? And the reason this is important is we've had Tech Ranch and zeet have had customers who come to us to say, we, have a great business in this country over here, and now we want to extend to America and take advantage of American consumers that would want to buy what we sell, or American businesses. This is a great example. And we say, okay, so let's talk about American businesses today. Let's talk about the business environment, and let's talk about what's happening in America. Who buys your product in your country? And they may say, well, marketing buys it. And we just go straight to the direct marketer and they purchase our software. And I come back and say, okay, in the American environment, what happens is it's not the marketer that owns that decision, it's sales. And what happens is the chief sales officer, chief revenue officer is the one who makes the final decision. And the director of marketing is only one voice at the table. You also have to have a technology representative. You have to have a marketing technology user. And you have to have an executive on the IT side who actually approves of the technology spend. So if you look at your environment in the United States, your buying environment is quite different than what you assume it might be in your own country. So if you're looking and basing a product and a brand off of what you know, it can fail unless you ask critical questions. The more we ask, the more we learn. And the more we learn, the more informed and intelligent we can create a product or a brand, or even a content, a conversation, a campaign. This is relevant all the way through from product development and design, all the way through to brand and marketing. The more we ask, the more we learn. And as we launch, we prototype based on what we know. We launch, then we test, and then we optimize, and then we relaunch. And it's a circle of continuous curiosity throughout the entire life cycle of a customer to figure out what they need, how you're meeting those needs, and how you need to adapt or even pivot to claim your niche. Curiosity can drive your business forward at its essential piece. So let's talk about what we recommend as you are going into exploring curiosity, and you're looking at figuring out what questions you can ask and what questions you can answer using the resources that you have. If you can't pull in a zeet to do this, and you have more time than you have resources, sometimes what you can do is you can conduct this research on your own. You can indulge in your own curiosity initially to see what you can find out. So what we talk about is what you can learn from the internet, from your customers, and from your competition. And these are three critical places. And I know the internet and customers there's definitely some overlap, same thing with the internet and your competition, but I'll dig into each of these and the questions you ask to those audiences or on those channels and how people answer them. So let's start initially with the internet. The internet is a great tool for you to figure out what conversations are happening. And so within that realm, what you want to do is you want to ask questions about media, questions about experts, see what research has been done about your audience. So the first question we want to ask is, what do magazines say? And this is relevant to consumer products or business products. What are the most innovative monthly magazines or industry associations? What are they saying about what's going on, about what the pain points are? There are tons and tons of surveys that you can explore. So the first thing you want to do is see what new websites say, see what media says. Also look at industry experts. So if you are in specific industries, there are people talking about those industries that have a ton of information to offer. You have to dig into what they say. So if that means you're reading McKinsey or Forrester or Bain or Ad Age or any other entity that's conducting real research that you need to dig into. You need to look at the questions. You need to analyze the responses. You can look into the demographics and see if they fit your demographics. But as you do this, you have to understand and gather what they say, and you have to use it to inform and change if it's different than what you think. Also, economic predictions. So I spoke with a chief product officer at the end of last week, and we talked about business and we talked about design. And he said, the market's shifting. This upcoming year, companies are going to have a really hard time. And so the types of stuff they're buying is going to be different. The types of stuff they're investing in is going to be different. Some think, you might think that you have a valuable product to offer because you're saving money and time, when at the same time their needs might have shifted and they're willing to spend a bit more money to get a competitive advantage because they're not in the quadrant, where they are in the Gartner quadrant, for instance. Gartner Magic Quadrant for consumer businesses or business to business software. It's important to see what economic predictions are affecting your clients globally and then also regionally. You also want to look, this is one of the best resources that people rarely use. So if you think about hot topics, you think about content planners. So let's use South by Southwest as an example. They have a ton of consumer technology, a bunch of design, software, marketing, brand. It's just an enormous interactive place where you can go and learn a lot. So if you look at the topics at South by Southwest, and there are like 1,200 panels, but if you look at what topics are discussed, what people had voted for, what has gone through and been approved by the South by Southwest employees and the board, they have a board that reviews it. These represent the hottest topics that people are discussing. So if it's about cannabis and people who are using blockchain on the supply chain for cannabis, and the types of companies who are doing that are pushing into the Fortune 100 companies, then you better understand what they're talking about. And if you are a technology developer, then you may need to shift to understand the needs and the best opportunities based on the most popular topics at these events. So dig into industry conferences, figure out what people are talking about, what hot topics they are, follow the hashtags. If a conference in the United States just completed. Healthcare in the United States has the HIMSS conference. Consumer electronics has CES. If those just completed, if they just finished, go back and look at the hashtags and see what people are posting about and see who is sharing those and how often they're shared when people are live tweeting sessions. Dig into conferences because they are an amazing resource to figure out what the internet has to offer to tell you what's going on. And then also, what are your prospects saying in press releases? Yet again, an amazing resource for you to be able to get intelligence about your prospect customers and what's important to them. Go to PR Wire and search for your company, your prospect's name. And, identify your top 10 or 12 customers and dig into what people are talking about. Are they making acquisitions? Are they hiring a new chief technology officer? What's important to that CTO or that chief experience officer, that chief marketing officer? Or are they hiring a new executive of whatever department, director of data center? So why don't you go and look at consumer organizations or business organizations to figure out what prospect companies are saying in press releases if you're a B2B company? So once again, if you have questions, you can submit them on the chat. So the next area that we want to dig into, first off, looking at the internet helps you build a hypothesis of what your personal customers are going to think and feel and prioritize. But then there's nothing more valuable than the voice of the customer themselves. So what you want to do is you want to take the information that you've learned by looking at the internet. We call that secondary information. Most of it is secondary qualitative information, using information that's not statistics, that's information that's digging in a little bit more deeply on an empathetic level rather than a statistical level. You take that information, use the scientific method to build a hypothesis, and then you talk to your audience to either validate it or change it with the information they provide. So your customers are a critical feedback partner. So what you want to ask your customers, you want to dig into their story in their own words, in their own voice. How do they use the product? How do they do things today? How are they using the products they use today? What would it look like for them to start using your product? How do they feel about changing products? How much have they paid before for this solution? You want to understand your customer's story. Why do they care? You want to understand how someone deals with it today. What does it actually look like? Sometimes you can do that with some products by going to a store and watching. Sometimes you can work with that and observe them in their home. You can do contextual inquiry, which is going into their homes or in their business spaces and watching what they do. Also, what signals are people sharing about by industry and customers on social media? Once again, I talked about conferences and following hashtags for conferences. There's also a tremendous opportunity for you to find consumers that are posting about something that's important, finding consumer hashtags that are relevant, and looking on Twitter, looking on Tumblr, looking at Instagram, and searching Facebook if you can, depending also on the demographics of your users. Gen X versus millennials versus boomers and whatnot. They're all posting on different platforms. But see what they're sharing on social media, and also industry experts. We talked about McKinsey and Forrester and Ad Age and all of these places you can go. What are they sharing on social media as well? And then going down to that last bullet, what are my customers' characteristics and how frequently are they present? For instance, going back to the example we had about software developers are mostly male, and their Americans are mostly female. So if you're creating a gaming platform, if you look at the demographics of gamers and they're mostly male, then the platform is very likely mostly male. However, if you're creating a financial application and you look at the people who control investments and finances in the American household, do you know if they're mostly male? You would think they are. But as far as the consumer spend, a lot of the consumer spend in American households is directed by the female in the household. And so as you're looking at understanding your customers' characteristics and how frequently they're present, I recommend that you push more on your assumptions of who you're building for and ask how true is this and how frequent is this? Another example is you might conduct a survey and you might dig in and say, what are your pain points? Put them in priority order. Now, you know that ease of use is important, and you've created a beautiful consumer application that has a gorgeous interface. It's so easy to use. Swipe left, swipe right, super simple, very intuitive. And you think that that's going to be the most important piece of success. But when you look at your research, what your curiosity and your question asking has uncovered is the fact that that's important, but that's number 3. And the most important thing is price. And the second most important thing is a powerful chat feature. And so what you do is you have to figure out, it's not that ease of use isn't a good thing to invest in, but it is that ease of use isn't number 1. And what that can help you do is it can help you tailor your product, but it can also help you tailor your brand to what's important to your niche audience. Next, I want to talk more about your competition. So what happens quite frequently is that people think about, okay, this is what my brand is, this is what we do, this is what my customers need, this is what experts say, and they can stop there. But what they don't necessarily understand is how to compete, especially when you're launching into global markets, how to compete against the competitors, who they are, what segments they're in. You may have a cloud-based competitor, an on-premise competitor, a subscription mobile app competitor, a app store purchase competitor, competitors at different price points with different features. You don't only have to understand their features to understand how to compete or their price point. What you also have to understand is how they position themselves. So we did a project, a competitive analysis for Box. And Box said, okay, we want to look at Google, we want to look at Office 365, and we want to look at Dropbox. And then we want you to look at what we're doing. And so when we conducted that research for that specific product set, we found that every single one of those companies were talking about the same thing, using the same words, discussing it in the same way. None of them stood out as saying anything that was unique. And so as you conduct your competitive analysis, even big companies get stuck in this. What you need to do is you need to ask yourself not just what's true, but also what's different. So how are your competitors talking about themselves? What is their brand identity? Where do they put a stake in the ground? They may be leading with ease of use and productivity. So you need to put your stake in the ground somewhere else. What features and pricing do they offer, as we discussed? Who are the clients they feature in case studies? That helps you better define who their true ideal target audience is. And then you can ask, okay, how does that differ from ours? What partners do they have? If they're selling through channels, if they're building relationships because it's like Intel Inside in Dell MacBooks or Dell computers or MacBooks or whatnot. You think about Intel partnering with those hardware providers that are actually building the personal computers. That's a powerful partnership. Who's going to be able to compete with Intel if they are already integrated with these very powerful companies, if they have the biggest market share possible? You have to ask yourself the question, all right, how am I really going to set myself apart? How can I build partnerships, and what does that look like? Where do I start? And at the end of that, at the end of this, everything comes into context when you consider, we talked about how you can win using your niche messaging. It's also creating niche product. How can you compete and win against them? It's not just what do they do and what do we do? It's where do we need to go to have the highest likelihood of not only winning new business, but winning their business. Not just the people who have never adopted, but the people who are working with that company. How can I find them and take their business away to increase my market share? And so that's what you want to do, is you're asking these critical questions about the internet, what that says about your customers, who they are and what's important to them, and about your competition. How can you stand different and differentiated from your competition. So I love this quote. I talked a little about the scientific process, and I talked about how you ask questions and you build a product. And then what you do is you launch your product. Especially in today's world, you're able to launch the product, generate data to talk about how it did, and then go all the way back and conduct research to figure out how to make it better, launch another prototype or another version of the product, and continue to improve. Agile and waterfall funnel into this. And so as you're looking at what you're building, whether it is a consumer product or if it is a patented product that you are in technology or in healthcare, medical devices or whatnot, if it is a type of application, a mobile app, software, everything you build, you should be aware that at some point it's going to have to change because people do not stay the same. The market does not stay the same. So my recommendation is, this is one other thing. I talked to an angel investor and a VC months ago, and one of the questions I had for them, going back to that 90% of startups fail but 10% succeed, one of the questions I had for them was, okay, so what do the companies that fail have in common? Where is it that they miss the mark? And what the VC and the angel investor said was they fail to pivot. They don't change with the market. They don't change with their customers' needs. They don't ask enough questions. They're not curious enough and adept enough at responding. Instead, they build a product. They say, I'm smart. This is smart. They're going to buy it. And I know so many founders who take that approach. They say, I'm smart. I know the industry. I know who my customers are. I'm going to build this product. People are going to buy it because this is great. I'm passionate about it. So of course, other people are going to be passionate about it. But what happens is companies who aren't curious, who aren't asking questions, who aren't thinking about how they might need to shift or change or pivot, those companies are the ones that are that 90%. And so we wanted to talk to you a bit more today about honing your message, finding your niche, building your prototype, testing it, talking to people, and then being willing to set aside your pride, become and humbly put yourself in front of your customers and ask those questions. Not be satisfied with a staid, stoic, sedentary approach to what you're building and what your clients need. And that kind of curiosity, that kind of openness is what is driving the best design, the best products, and the best brands in the market today. So on that note, we've left some time for conversations and questions. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to address what's come forward already. And I am trying to figure out how to access those. So let me go back. Okay, much of this is symmetric to existing behaviors and methodologies or going with the flows. I'm interested in creating asymmetric solutions to social scotomas. Another way to state this, there are invisible problems and invisible problems. As an example, this would be SJ in the introduction of the iPod, iPad, and iPhone. I understand these products intimately in the ecosystem that Steve created for these because I worked in AppleCare before, during and after these products were introduced. Those were examples of products that had no demand until creation. Steve actually created the ecosystem beforehand. He called the interactions the digital hub. Steve found the void and filled it. Could this be an instance of creating niche? Absolutely. But what that didn't start with was no idea of what the customer need was. And Apple is design focused. They're like design first. And so what happens is that as you're looking at creating a product like this, if you're looking at creating a new niche, if you are the Uber, what you have to first understand is what is the need you're addressing. If you are the Mac computer, and this is something that the world hasn't necessarily seen before, There is an enormous opportunity. However, other people will come along. Samsung is going to create a phone. Dell is going to create a personal computer. And so as you continue to go along, even Steve Jobs, as competition arose, he created his niche, but to stay ahead of it, he had to understand how the consumer behavior and what the consumer needs were as he was shifting. He had to understand what his competitors were doing and what experts were saying was the new frontier, even if he might have been creating the new frontier. He had to stay aware of it. IBM's created a quantum computer. They brought Watson to the forefront of technology advancement. They're doing some really interesting, innovative stuff, and they're not resting on their laurels. They know that it's going to be a while before the quantum computer is a realistic sale, but what their niche is innovation, and to do that, they have to stay ahead of anybody. So yes, Steve Jobs opening up a space, understanding a mental model of the needs that his audience had, building to that was him creating a niche, but him asking questions of how his customers and the market and his competition evolved meant that he continued to shift his focus on what his niche was. It wasn't only innovation anymore. It was something different. So the companies, the next question, what are the companies you had mentioned? Forrester, McKinsey, Ad Age. So it all depends on what your market is. If you look at industry analysts for your specific market. So I'm going to type an answer on this one. McKinsey is a group that they're one of the top 4 consulting firms, and they talk a lot and publish a lot. Accenture is another one that publishes a lot. I'll put this down there. Forrester is specifically focused on marketing. For instance, Gartner is specifically focused on technology and enterprise technology. Ad Age is actually focused a lot on creative and design and marketing. And it all depends on what your specific industry is. Just search for industry analysts, mobile technology, or industry analysts, healthcare, or industry analyst, and whatever your industry is. And so that will help you figure out who the people are you can be listening to. So the list I gave you it is not remotely inclusive of everyone you should listen to. Google and find your specific analyst. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, Maria, anything to add?
No, I think that's it. I'll give everyone a couple more seconds to submit any questions. I want to thank Annie for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with this group, and for all of your involvement in Tech Grants. We really appreciate it. For everyone that's on the call, this is part of a series. So if you haven't had a chance to join our newsletter so that you'll get reminders about all of these, I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat box so you can get all the reminders for upcoming webinars or all of our events that we hold in Austin, but we also do work all around the world. So let me see if there was one more question that came in, or no, that was just a thank you. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I think we can call it a day.
All right, many thanks to everyone. Goodbye.